What if I told you that 3 experienced lighthouse keepers disappeared from a remote Scottish island in broad daylight, and no one has ever figured out how? December 26th, 1900. The lighthouse tender Hesperus arrived at the Flannan Isles for a routine relief visit. But when the crew sounded their horn, fired a rocket into the sky, and shouted toward the lighthouse, nothing. Just silence. Relief keeper Joseph Moore climbed the 160 steps to the lighthouse alone. The door was closed but unlocked. Inside he found the kitchen clean, the beds unmade, and a clock that had stopped ticking. 3 men, James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur, had disappeared. No bodies, no struggle, no goodbye. This is the story of the Flannan Isle mystery, a disappearance so baffling that 125 years later, we still don't know what really happened that day. The Flannan Isles are a small group of islands in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland, approximately 17.5 nautical miles west of the Isle of Lewis. Rocky, windswept, utterly remote. The islands take their name from Saint Flannan, a 7th-century Irish preacher and abbot. For centuries, local shepherds would bring sheep to graze on the islands, but they refused to stay after dark. They believed the islands were haunted. The locals weren't entirely superstitious for nothing. Even the hardy sheepherders refused to stay on the island after dark, fearing the ghosts and phantasms that lurked there. But the Northern Lighthouse Board had a job to do. The waters around the Flannan Isles were treacherous, responsible for countless shipwrecks. Ships needed a light to guide them safely through. So in 1899, they built a lighthouse on Island Moor, the largest of the Flannan Isles. The 23-meter lighthouse was designed by David Allen Stevenson and constructed between 1895 and 1899. All materials had to be hauled up 45-meter cliffs directly from supply boats. The lighthouse was first lit on December 7, 1899, just over a year before the men vanished. The lighthouse operated on a rotating schedule. 3 keepers lived on the island at any given time, while a 4th stayed on the mainland, rotating in every few weeks. It was isolated work, but the men were professionals. Experienced, reliable, which is what made what happened next so impossible to explain. The 3 keepers on duty in December 1900 were James Ducat, principal keeper, Thomas Marshall, second assistant, and Donald MacArthur, occasional keeper, filling in for William Ross, who was on sick leave. James Ducat was 43 years old, married with 4 children. He had over 20 years of experience as a lighthouse keeper, and was known for his strict adherence to protocol and meticulous record-keeping. Thomas Marshall was 28, unmarried, and had been with the lighthouse service for 5 years. Marshall had previously been fined 5 shillings, a significant amount for a man in his job, for losing equipment in a storm. He would have been extremely careful not to let that happen again. Donald MacArthur was the occasional keeper, filling in temporarily. MacArthur had a reputation for brawling and was known to be violent. The men followed a strict routine. Every day they recorded weather observations, maintained the light, and logged their activities. The last written entries in the keeper's log were for December 13th, but here's where it gets strange. The particulars for December 14th, including the time of extinguishing the light on December 15th, along with barometer and thermometer readings and wind conditions taken at 9 a.m. on December 15th, were noted on the slate for transferring to the log later. The lamp was ready to be lit, and it was evident that the work of the forenoon of the 15th had been completed. Everything pointed to the men disappearing on the afternoon of December 15th, sometime between the 9 a.m. weather readings and nightfall, which in December in Scotland would have been around 4 p.m. But no one knew they were missing yet. On December 15th, the steamer Arctur, on a passage from Philadelphia to Leith, noted in its log that the light was not operational. But this wasn't communicated to the Northern Lighthouse Board until after the keeper's disappearance had been discovered. For 11 days, the lighthouse sat dark and empty, and nobody knew. The relief vessel Hesperus was unable to sail from Breescleet Lewis, as planned on December 20th, due to adverse weather. She didn't reach the island until noon on December 26th, Boxing Day. Captain Jim Harvey sounded the ship's horn and sent up a flare, hoping to alert the 3 lighthouse keepers. There was no response. Joseph Moore, the relief keeper, set off up the steep steps to the lighthouse. As he climbed, Moore felt an overwhelming sense of foreboding, Something wasn't right. When he reached the top, he found the entrance gate and main door closed. Not locked, just closed. He pushed the door open. The beds were unmade. The clock on the kitchen wall had stopped. A chair was toppled over. The table was set for a meal that remained uneaten. The only sign of life was a canary in a cage in the kitchen. Moore ran back to the ship with the grim news. Captain Harvey sent 2 more sailors to help with the search. They discovered that the lamps had been cleaned and refilled. The lighthouse was in perfect working order, but something crucial was missing. They found a set of oilskins, the waterproof coats keepers wore in bad weather, still hanging in the entrance. This suggested that one of the men had gone outside without proper protection from the elements. December, on a remote Scottish island, in the middle of winter. Why would an experienced keeper do that? The men scoured the island looking for any sign of the missing keepers. They found nothing on the eastern landing. Everything was intact and in order. But the western landing told a different story. The west landing, the men found evidence of massive damage caused by recent storms. A box stored 33 meters above sea level had been broken, and its contents strewn about. Iron railings were bent over. The iron railway by the path was wrenched out of its concrete. A rock weighing more than a ton had been moved a considerable distance. The power of the waves that had hit this area must have been extraordinary. Captain Harvey sent a telegram on December 26th stating, "A dreadful accident has happened at Flannan's. The 3 keepers, Ducat, Marshall, and the Occasional, have disappeared from the island. The clocks were stopped and other signs indicated that the accident must have happened about a week ago. Poor fellows, they must have been blown over the cliffs or drowned trying to secure a crane." On December 29th, Robert Muirhead, Northern Lighthouse Board Superintendent, arrived to conduct an official investigation. Muirhead had personally recruited all 3 men. He knew them well. Muirhead examined the clothing and concluded that Marshall and Ducat had gone down to the western landing to secure supplies and equipment, but were swept away by the severe storm. He suggested that MacArthur, wearing only his shirt rather than oilskins, followed them, and similarly perished. The official verdict, accidental drowning. But that explanation left a lot of questions unanswered. Why would all 3 men leave the lighthouse at once? Regulations strictly prohibited all lighthouse staff from leaving their posts at the same time. Why would MacArthur go out without his coat in the middle of winter? And here's the most disturbing question. There were no reports of storms in the area in the days leading up to the disappearance. So when did this catastrophic wave hit? And why didn't the men mention it in their logs? In the years following the disappearance, a story began to circulate that made the mystery even more unsettling. According to reports, the logbook supposedly contained entries between December 12th and 15th, written by Marshall describing a great storm unlike anything he had seen before. The entries claimed Ducat was unusually quiet, and MacArthur, a big burly man not known to have a sensitive side, was weeping. The final log entry reportedly said, "Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all." These entries painted a picture of 3 men absolutely terrified by something outside, praying together, watching as an unnatural storm battered their lighthouse. The problem? A later investigation revealed that no such entries had ever been made, and were likely falsified to further sensationalize the story. As Fortean Times journalist Mike Dash discovered after conducting his own investigation, the logbook entries were injected into the story several years after the men disappeared. So we're back to the facts, and the facts are limited. The actual last log entry was December 13th, with weather notes on the slate from the morning of December 15th. Nothing dramatic, nothing unusual, just routine observations, and then they were gone. Over the past 125 years, countless theories have tried to explain what happened. The official theory: Muirhead declared that 2 men had traveled to the West Landing around dinner time on December 15th to secure ropes and the supply box. An extra-large wave had rushed up the face of the rock, gone above them, and swept them completely away. When MacArthur noticed they hadn't returned, he went looking without his oilskins and met the same fate. The murder theory. Some speculated that MacArthur, known for his ill temper and quick fists, could have started a fight at the Western Landing that led to all 3 men falling to their deaths. Or perhaps he murdered the other 2 and threw himself off the cliffs in remorse. The supernatural theories. Implausible stories ensued, that a sea serpent had carried the men away, that they had been abducted by foreign spies, or that they had met their fate through the malevolent presence of a phantom boat. But here's what keeps investigators coming back to this case: the timing. Everything in the lighthouse suggested a routine morning. The men completed their 9 a.m. observations. They prepared the lamp for the evening lighting. They went about their normal duties. And then, in a window of just a few hours on a December afternoon, all 3 experienced keepers vanished without a trace. No distress signals, no warnings, no goodbye notes, just gone. The 3 men are recorded in the Register of Deaths for the District of Carloway, with the cause of death noted as probably drowning. Probably. James Ducat was survived by his wife and 4 children: Louisa, 16, Robert, 13, Annabella, 9, and Arthur, 6. Thomas Marshall was unmarried and had no children. Donald MacArthur was survived by his wife and 2 children, families who never got closure, children who never learned what happened to their fathers, a superintendent who had the melancholy recollection that he was the last person to shake hands with them and bid them adieu just weeks before they disappeared. The Flannan Isles have been devoid of permanent residents since the automation of the lighthouse in 1971. Today, the lighthouse still stands, automated and unmanned, a lonely monument on a haunted island. The mystery has inspired poems, songs, operas, films, including the 2019 movie The Vanishing starring Gerard Butler. The story refuses to die because the questions refuse to be answered. Did a rogue wave really sweep away 3 experienced men who knew better than to all leave the lighthouse at once? Did something darker happen on that western landing? A fight, a murder, an accident that spiraled out of control? Or is there an explanation we haven't even considered? Here's what haunts me most. These weren't reckless men. They were professionals with families waiting for them. They knew the rules, they knew the dangers. They knew that all 3 of them should never, ever leave the lighthouse at the same time. And yet they did. What could have been so urgent, so compelling, so terrifying, that it made 3 grown men break the most fundamental rule of their profession? What did they see from that lighthouse window on the afternoon of December 15th, 1900? What made them walk out that door, one of them without even grabbing his coat, and step into oblivion? We'll never know. The Flannan Isles keep their secrets. The lighthouse keeps its light. And somewhere in the cold waters off the coast of Scotland, 3 men who vanished 125 years ago remain missing, lost to history, lost to the sea, lost to a mystery that may never be solved. The door was closed when Joseph Moore arrived, but what was on the other side when the men walked through it for the last time? That's the question that will haunt the Flannan Isles forever.